Rhoda and Joe want a quiet honeymoon at home. Ma and Pop Morgenstern have other ideas. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're returning to the Mary Tyler Moore-verse.
Yes. Is it the
MTM?
I guess she spawned everything.
Yeah.
It seems like calling it the Tinkerverse would be a little, I don't know, something seems wrong about that.
Yeah. Or we could call it the Brooks relation Burns verse.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd object to that.
Yeah. But Rhoda, another spin-off from the Mary Tyler Moore show. So we've already done Lou Grant.
Well, that's right, yes.
Does this mean we're committed to Phyllis? Because
well, we can put it on the big list. How about that?
Okay.
Someday.
I don't know if Phyllis is widely available.
No. Let's go with that.
Yeah. But the 1974 spinoff.
That's right.
After the third season or fourth season?
It had been several seasons.
Yes.
I'm not sure which. Maybe after the third season, maybe?
I think so. Now, in Valerie Harper's memoir, I Rhoda, which I checked out from the library.
That's right.
Oh, and you have it in paperback.
I have it as well.
She does say that Fred Silverman brought up the idea during season one, or near the end of season one of Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Fred Silverman also gets blamed, I think, for something else, which we may talk about later, or we can talk about it now.
For not setting it in Wisconsin?
Well, yes, he was particularly insistent on that.
That seemed like, if you read that little detail, that was one of the ideas that she was going to move to rural Wisconsin.
Yes. Fred Silverman's notorious anti-Midwestern bias quashed that very quickly.
Yeah, his anti-rural stance, of course.
When Fred Silverman was at ABC, he managed to make sure the Green Bay Packers never played on Monday Night Football. That's how much he was...
Wow.
He
hated cheese. That's how he kept his golden gut, by not eating cheese.
By not eating cheese.
Yeah.
I'm kidding about that, of course. But actually, it was the wedding of Rhoda that Fred Silverman apparently was particularly insistent on. That is, according to this book here.
Fred.
Mary and Lou and Rhoda and Ted by Jennifer Keeshan Armstrong, which covers, it's mostly about the Mary Tyler Moore Show, but also gets into the spinoffs. And yes, so I think Rhoda is one of those shows we've talked about before that is incredibly defined by maybe one or two episodes. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's impossible to consider Rhoda now without considering some of the creative choices they made. And one of those is that wedding episode.
Right, which was a huge hit and beat Monday Night Football. And was it real Monday Night Football, or
it was real Monday Night Football? Yeah, I mean it was one of the highest rated shows that had aired to that point in history, I think.
And I mean, according to Valerie Harper, the Tower Cosell was making comments about it during the football game. And
legendary David Groh. Yeah. I'd like to see Howard go one-on-one with David Groh.
Yeah.
They could have like an Ali Cosell type relationship.
Come on, Howard.
Cosell and Groh. Those two going back and forth would be something to see.
Now, David Groh, you have a hairy chest.
Wide world of entertainment with Howard Cosell's legendary interviews with David Groh.
Yeah. But she talks about people mailing it presents for them, which is insane in a way. It's cute. That's
right. So the wedding was probably, inarguably the ratings peak of the show, and maybe the peak of the show period. It sounds like. Yeah. And Fred Silverman apparently started pushing it right away because he wanted a fall sweeps period-ish wedding. So they, it was like late October in the month, and they did the wedding. And according to this book, some of the people are saying, wait a minute, we got many stories to tell. We don't want to do the wedding yet, but he insisted and got his way.
Oh, okay.
So the book doesn't give a whole lot of detail on it, but it pretty much says that Fred Silverman was the one that pushed up what, in retrospect, should have taken place much later in the show's run.
Yes.
Happened 8 episodes in? 8,
right.
9, 10?
So, because later they made the choice, which, I mean, you can see the sense in a way that for them it wasn't working to have Rhoda married and kind of content, because I guess people liked her when she was losing. Like, I never thought of her as a loser, but Valerie Harper keeps using that word, so she would have known better. But and so they had them get divorced, which is pretty revolutionary for the time, especially considering in 1970 they couldn't even say Mary Richards was divorced.
Yeah, they were terrified of that.
Yeah, now they're having characters, but it also caused. I mean, when you have people sending in toasters to then have those characters get divorced, it's going to cause some issues.
Yes, right.
Plus, there's the Rhoda fans and there's the Joe fans. And, who gets the fans?
Yeah, I don't know who gets the toaster. Yeah. Angry viewers, I sent them a toaster.
Who gets the fondue pots?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, there were plenty of those to go around as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the show changed, and well, I think in this book by Jennifer Armstrong, it was that she quotes James L. Brooks as saying like, the divorce, we never should have done the divorce. It was a big mistake. He admitted. Well, but she points out, well, he said that the wedding never should have been done too.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's
so they basically wrote themselves into a corner.
Yeah,
we can get in. I don't really buy this. I mean, everybody associated with the show says the same excuse of like, oh, it wasn't funny anymore, and the show declined. It wasn't funny. But why ruin the show just because? I don't know. It seems like a lame excuse. It's like we talked about on Moonlighting, I believe. That age-old premise that no show with a happy couple can exist.
Right.
Totally contradicting classics like Heart to Heart. And I don't buy that.
I don't buy it either. And it's. This case is very similar to the Spider-Man thing in the comics, where Peter Parker and Mary Jane got married in the 80s. And then for 15 years at least, writers were complaining that he couldn't tell interesting stories with Peter Parker because he was happy.
Right.
And so they couldn't just have them get divorced. Like normal people, so they had
because it would
make it
would irritate people.
Yeah,
it would retroactively make them feel differently about what they've already read.
Right,
which I think happened with Rhoda.
Yeah, and so because they had some tools available to them that Rhoda doesn't. They had them make a deal with the devil more or less.
And you don't mean Fred Silverman? You mean the actual?
Yes,
Mephisto. Yes, okay.
Yeah, they put a lot of other things back in the bottle, but it's just. It's weird.
Well, I think one of the funny things about what Rhoda did is, one of Rhoda was notable for having like a lot of female writers, female producers, and everything. So it's women running the show for the most part. But the idea of like, oh, let's explore Rhoda as a single woman again and stuff. But from what I've been watching, in preparation for this, they don't even get into her dating life all that much afterwards. Like, especially like towards the end of the show, they're going in other directions, and it's more like Rhoda's like work life and things like that. But it's not like it was a series of dating adventures or everything. It's almost like they just gave up on the whole idea, despite some some recurring characters and some dates and everything. But if you look back now and like, okay, after Rhoda broke up with Joe, was it about her being the travails of a single woman in New York? No, the single part doesn't really come into it that much.
Yeah.
So it's like, where were they going? What were all these great stories is what I would say. Because to me, the fourth and fifth, especially the fourth and fifth seasons are terrible compared to, well, terrible is a strong word.
Yeah.
But they're not nearly as entertaining as the first couple seasons.
Yeah, I haven't. I've only watched the entire first season.
Okay. All right.
But I would say Rhoda and Joe are one of the most appealing parts of it.
Yeah.
Not, I mean, to me, the top is Rhoda and Brenda. But they're just really likable, and they still have conflicts, and you can still have wacky characters.
Yeah,
they do have wacky. I mean, they have Nancy Walker,
for
Pete's sake, and Carlton the doorman, and Myrna Morgenstein.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. A problem I have is, and it continues throughout the 5 seasons, is they keep bringing on new characters, recurring characters. It's like they keep trying to find something that they never really find, and then the characters come and go.
Right.
Like Ann Mira is a regular for like the 3rd season and then leaves. The great Ron Silver is a character for a while. And most of these characters I don't like. Or at least they're better in small doses and not worth building the show around. The one to build the show around is Rhoda, in my opinion.
Right.
And they don't do that. She's often like a supporting character in her own series, which
I guess is part of their argument, or was part of their argument, that because she wasn't funny anymore, the character, not Valerie Harper, that they had to, focus more on Brenda and Ida. But that seems odd to me too, because the way, like, Rhoda as a person is funny, is a funny person, like makes jokes that are coming from her having a sense of humor. So why would that go away?
I agree.
Like maybe they weren't generating situations that were funny, but I think part of what I've seen in the show that makes it special is it's not that the situations are funny, or that, I mean, some of them are, but it's just the characters and how they interact and their senses of humor. And you need some laughs, you got Carlton.
Yeah. I think with a less talented lead actress, yes, but Valerie Harper is funny, and she's got charisma enough to carry the show and not need to be forced into like a bunch of like wacky situations.
Right.
And I think she can hold her own even, in the episode we're going to talk about later, I think serves to me as a blueprint of how they could have done the show and how they could have done this. But, hey, I can't speak for the writers, but I think they miscalculated. And the proof is in the pudding, because a lot of those later episodes, and especially after Joe left, they're just, I don't know, the show just doesn't do it for me as much. Yeah. And it's kind of a shame. I think like the first season, you really see, okay, the show is finding itself and you're seeing what it could be. And here's another thing I would say is this is something I wouldn't recommend people do. We're trained at doing this. Like, for one thing, Rhoda, I watched most of the episodes on YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's available. I don't think it's been available streaming anywhere legit for a while, if ever.
There were some DVDs, right?
It took a while. Yes, and it took a long time to get the show out on DVD. So watching on YouTube, one thing I thought was very interesting was been reading a lot of the comments on the people posting it.
Okay.
And to me, it's very interesting because you see people commenting as the show goes on and as the episode goes on. In almost every episode, people are talking about Rhoda and Joe. And to me, it leans heavily towards people like lamenting the fact that they broke up Rhoda and Joe. Even if they like the later episodes, or even on a later episode, they might be, I wish they hadn't broken up Rhoda and Joe, and people like feeling sad about that. And to me, it's kind of like one of those things where like you and I think going back and watching the first season, it's hard to watch those, and the scenes probably play differently because you know what happens to the characters eventually.
Yeah, every now and then their lines, like at the beginning of this episode. Certainly, or there'll be times where they're talking about the rest of the future things and all of that, and unfortunately,
yeah,
we know now in the future that you're not going to make it,
right?
But that didn't bother me too much, just because I haven't seen any of the divorce episodes.
Yeah,
so it was a little wistful, but I was just engaged in the present moment of those.
That's fair enough. But I think it's jarring too, because it's not like they did a big transition. I think they decided after the second season,
right?
And they basically decided to write them out. And in the third season, it sort of plays out where they're separated.
Yeah.
But the first season of the third episode is when they separate, and it happens very suddenly. The first episode of the third season. They got me mixed. It was very jarring to me.
Yeah,
obviously. Yeah. So I'm shaken up by it. But it happens very suddenly, and it seems to me like the Joe character, they changed him a little bit just to do this.
Right.
Which I think that's what really irritated people too, is like, where did this come from? It's not like we saw. Now you can look back and say, well, in retrospect, okay, Rhoda kind of forced him into getting married, and that's kind of how they take it. Like he says, like they have an episode in the third season where they go to marriage counseling, and he says kind of in there that he never wanted to get married. Which you can sort of see that, but it still feels a little bit like retconning because they seem so happy earlier on. This kind of came out of nowhere,
right?
And he was only in like a handful of episodes, like to just do the separation, and it wound up going pretty quickly into like, okay, divorce, it's over.
Yeah,
but.
And then they never mention him again.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess why would you? Because you're going to remind people that, hey, there's this character, this good relationship you had. What happened to him anyway? Right.
I mean, in real life, his name would come up probably.
I would think, yeah. I mean, they didn't have kids together at least.
But, but it just happens. And Rhoda's not a fragile piece of china or something.
Well, and
she could take it, I think.
Here's the thing. In the third season,
Yeah.
When they're separated, she's basically pining after him and she's kind of desperate to get him back, and he's more distant. He just making it sound like, and he's cool, like with kind of having things casual with them or whatever, and she wants to get him back. And I think that irritates people too. It's like, Rhoda's like tougher than this,
right?
But it makes her pursue him, and him kind of like not as interested or whatever, and it just doesn't work. Hey, that's life. In retrospect, what they should have done is introduce Joe early, but build up their relationship and have them get married, later. And I think somebody in one of the YouTube comments said, well, if you just had the series end with them getting married or something, and have him just like as a relationship or whatever, it would have been that girl or something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think you had to do it like that. You could have introduced Joe and then brought him back and have things keep them apart or whatever, something else. And then just not do the marriage like 10 episodes in.
Yeah, if you're not capable of writing the marriage. Yeah. I mean, like, she makes the point I thought was interesting in a way that standards and practices affected how much they could talk about in the marriage, and then maybe, you know, if it had been done later, it could have been like Mad About You. But I find that kind of weird because they seem to be constantly pushing against what, again, whatever, 10 years after the Dick Van Dyke Show, and the episode we're going to talk about starts with them in bed together,
right?
Presumably naked on their honeymoon night. I mean, and there are lots of jokes referring to, I mean, not jokes, I mean, it's just straight out referring to sex or birth control. They kind of walk a line about exactly what these ladies are up to, but
it's pretty clear. I mean, what else were they going to do? Right. Would be my thing. It sounds like more excuse making to me.
Yeah. And she seems, and again, it's a celebrity memoir.
Yeah, I mean,
and it sounds like she had mixed emotions about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she wanted them to do that.
No,
I think she's helping. So. Like she's seeing their perspective and saying, hey, well, the show went on for, like, from her point of view, it went on for 4.5 seasons, but it also got canceled unceremoniously. You know, like halfway through the last season.
Right, and they didn't air some of the episodes.
Right, and she says that she said something about, like, they had moved the show around. And it's like, well, yeah, but the show had gone down. It wasn't, and it was more popular than the Mary Tyler Moore Show at first. Yeah. Probably possibly because of that, you know, that big stunt. But my question is, it's really bizarre because it didn't seem like they intended to write a show about a married woman living in New York City. So, like, why did they do it so early?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Fred Silverman's not here to explain himself, to defend himself. So I don't want to go too far against him. But
yeah.
But that's the big common theme is nobody. I think James L. Brooks, you know, that quote sums it up. I mean, it's just like they didn't want them to they shouldn't have gotten them married, but they shouldn't have gotten them divorced either. So what are they going to do? And then I will point to those last couple seasons as like, well, here's the show. Is this the show you wanted? Because it didn't seem like that's the show they wanted either.
Yeah, because they didn't want a workplace show.
Right.
Which is understandable. They're already doing that.
Yeah. And
then obviously they didn't want a domestic show because
yeah,
they got rid of that part of it, and
they get it in, like, in the 5th season. She's working for at a costume shop, and I don't find those characters interesting at all either.
Yeah,
and
that sounds less interesting than her running her own business.
Yeah, it does. Now I will say, like, that episode, I forget what there's an early 3rd season episode because Joe is like, he's not in all the episodes, and they kind of go back and forth with him.
Yeah,
but the one where they go to marriage counseling, I was watching that, and it was raw. It was emotionally raw, like.
Yeah,
but there was like some honesty in it, and it had Renee Auberjonois as the
marriage counselor.
Yes, and he's very funny in it.
Yeah, gruff.
No,
or is he snooty? Or is he neither?
He's neither. He's more like young and poor, bad at his job, or like careless, you know.
Yeah, okay.
But it's good that there's some, like, real honesty in that. But I was thinking, you know, and part of it was the benefit of hindsight. It's like, do you really want this from Rhoda? This kind of episode? Yeah. It's like, it's kind of a bummer. I mean,
right.
As an episode, I think it's very interesting to watch. It's really fascinating. But, you know, this isn't really what the show was meant to do. I don't think so.
So all that said,
yeah,
I really liked the first season.
Well, that's good. Did you watch Rhoda before?
No, I think
before this.
I maybe saw a tiny bit of it on Nick at Night because I knew sort of the visual sense of it, and I knew the actors in it. I think I had in my mind. I couldn't remember what show Carlton was on. Carlton the doorman.
Your doorman.
My doorman. I thought maybe that was on Bob Newhart's show, but and that was about it. I must have tried to watch it or something when I'd gotten into watching Mary Tyler Moore a little bit, but that was it. So I didn't really know much going in. And so in a way, it was a pleasant surprise how much I mean, you know, I watched 25 episodes in like a week and a half. So.
Wow.
Or 2 weeks, whatever it was. So obviously I enjoyed it. Yeah. How about you?
No, I remember it being on probably when I was a kid, but since I wasn't really watching Mary Tyler Moore that much, I think I certainly wasn't going to watch Rhoda, which seemed to have even more of a sensibility and maybe be less accessible to me because Mary Tyler Moore had like a lot of familiar faces from other shows to me, whereas Rhoda had, you know, Rhoda,
the bounty
lady, and this
Marge Simpson,
and this guy David Groh who would show up on like Love Boat or whatever, and I wouldn't know who the heck he was.
Right.
So. Yeah, no, not really. I didn't really watch it much. And then I remember it being on like, you know, TV Land or Nick at Night and you know, like kind of like runs here and there. But I didn't really like watch a bunch of it. I watched a little bit of it here and there. But so the big surprise to me was how how often like these characters shifted. Like, I think if you would ask me, I would have assumed that Rhoda and Joe were together long, and that was like the heart of the show, as opposed to, well, they actually like not even half the show were they together. You know, that was a big surprise to me.
Yeah, that's it. Was a surprise to me when you mentioned it in the email. Like, oh, you're like, don't watch. Let's not do one of those episodes.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I would recommend that people check some of those out just to get a view for how different the show was. And to me, like, another thing is some of these like side characters they introduced, they're better in small doses, but I think the show is relying on them too much. But then again, I think the show is relying too much on the supporting characters from the beginning. Like, I'm going to say this might be controversial, but I'm not as big a fan of Brenda as everybody else seems to be. Like, I like her as a supporting character, but I don't want whole episodes centered on Brenda or
Well, don't tell Ida. Brenda, because she'll feel bad about it.
And if they are, I hope it's like once every now and then, not like every other episode have one where that's not centered on Rhoda. I just don't get into it as much.
Right. Yes, we're going to agree to disagree on Brenda, but
I mean, again, I like the character, but I want her more as a supporting character. And I don't want storylines centered on her as much.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, if it's like Brenda and Rhoda interacting, that's one thing. But, you know, I think I saw like at least one episode where like Rhoda's just kind of there in the background, and it really is about Brenda and her, you know, her life and everything like that. And to me, it just doesn't do it. I wouldn't want to watch a whole series like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to watch too many centered on Ida.
Yeah,
although she's very good, Nancy Walker.
She is. She was great on Macmillan and Wife.
Yeah,
and she's great here as, you know, a little bit of spice. But, you know, she comes on, does her thing. But yeah, I don't need to see a whole episode of that. Well, I shouldn't say a whole episode. I don't see episodes centered around her unless there's some really good reason for it. But it seems to me like, kind of like you said, that like they were just doing episodes around the others because they didn't feel they could write episodes about Rhoda.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
How about Scoey Mitchell? Is that his name?
Yes. The great Scoey Mitchell.
Would you like to see an episode about it?
Guest star fixture. You know what? I don't know, because in my watching Rhoda, I didn't come across. He's like Joe's business partner, right, for a while.
Like in this, he starts showing up in the second half of the first season.
I haven't really seen much Scoey Mitchell, so I can't comment.
So you probably didn't see much Myrna Morgenstein either. I don't know if she makes it beyond the first season.
No, I didn't, and I didn't see her, and I was kind of surprised because again, I was expecting there to be more of her, and it seemed like they kind of dropped her pretty quickly too, relatively quickly. But, you know, hey, if you can remove the great Ron Silver from your cast off camera, nobody's safe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what made Rhoda so exciting. The fact that no character
and Vivian
was safe.
Vance was on for a while.
I don't.
But she, you know, Ann Mira was sort of filling the Nancy Walker hole, right?
Yeah. See, I thought she was actually supposed to be filling the Mary Tyler Moore role.
Oh, okay.
Like having be sort of like the straight laced, like reasonable sister type.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. I didn't see. I'm just trying.
I mean,
because they brought her on during that season where, it's the third season where the parents are off on an RV trip because they had got their own shows on other networks.
No, which seems ridiculous. Yeah, and then eventually they split up those two.
Really?
Yes. Like, I don't know if they got them back together, but I guess like Martin goes off, Harold Gold goes off to like find him. He basically leaves her because he's like unsatisfied or needs to find himself or whatever. And I think he comes back to the show, but I don't know if they get together at the end or not.
Right.
You know, that seems to me like a little overkill.
Huh.
But yeah, the Ann Mira character, one of the episodes I saw, like it's like she's trying to get Rhoda to go out and do stuff, and they're like learning to play tennis and stuff together.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like that kind of deal. But she only lasted one season, I think.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, it's almost like, I don't want to say that they kept changing the format of the show, but they really were trying a bunch of different things and seeing if they would work. And well, you know, to me it didn't work because you had like a top 10 show that, you know, like I said, got dumped in the middle of its last season.
Yeah. Did you find this a little bit about the potential Joes when they were casting Joe?
I don't remember specifically, but I know that there was somebody in an episode I saw just the other day that was considered for
her husband, Valerie Harper's husband at the time, Dick Shaw. But the Brooks Burns conglomerate had a rule against having spouses work together as regulars.
Reasonable.
So he came on and he played Joe's buddy Charlie in multiple episodes who wrote it. They dislike each other.
All right.
Immensely. Joe Bologna was considered, but he wanted to bring his wife on to play Rhoda's boss. That would have
been Renee Taylor?
Yes.
Yes.
And they had originally she was going to work at a publishing house, which they dispensed with in an episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember
that. Yeah.
Like, okay. Well, that idea was okay.
Well, Joe, the name was right. Joe Baloney. Joe Baloney.
Joe Baloney.
Yep. He seems like he would have been a little too rough edged for that role. I can't see that. What about Joe Campanella? They should have gone through all the Joes.
Yeah.
Joseph Cotton, maybe a little too old.
Carmine Caridi and Michael Delano, who's probably you saw. Right?
Yes.
He plays one of her suitors later.
Yes, a recurring character, a lounge singer.
Yeah. And William Devane, a, quote, fantastic kisser, was offered the role, but he turned it down.
William Devane, was he... William Devane, because he was originally going to be Sam Malone, right?
Yes.
He was one of the finalists for that. I was
trying to remember who he was. I knew there was something like that.
So he got around, I guess, in these auditions.
Yeah. And it came down to David Groh and Alex Rocco.
Now that
who
is
was
interesting.
Just coming off The Godfather.
See, it's hard for me to square Godfather Alex Rocco, because I'm thinking of Facts of Life Alex Rocco.
Yeah, I know.
Which is like 10 years older, you know?
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to see that one, too.
I know, it's hard. And she says it came down to, quote, how Joe and Rhoda looked as a couple, and David fit the bill.
Oh, there you go.
There's another way of saying Alex Rocco. It's funny looking. I love Alex Rocco. But
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I can't see that either.
Yeah. Well, I think it worked out pretty well. And that's the other thing is they say that, like, they told him, like, well, they were basically telling David Groh, look, it's not you, it's us, you know. And
right.
But you know, if they said, well, the character, you know, wasn't coming along, and somebody said, you know, that David Groh wasn't really trained as a comic actor.
Yeah,
I think he's fine in the show,
I think he is. Yeah.
Again, it seems more like making excuses after the fact for this, but you know, is it? I think it's her book, right, where she says that like they kind of drew like short straws to see who would have to tell him, and like right when he came in, hey, I just bought a house.
Right.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's terrible. I mean,
but I could see him. I can see him play. Hey, I just bought. Well, okay.
Yeah. The character does have a bit of a temper sometimes. So, that would have been a good excuse to flash a temper, but you know, I guess he took it as well as you could.
Right.
And you know, he showed up on Love Boat and
Buck
Fantasy
Rogers.
Island. But yeah, that's an interesting list of. I mean, when you read that names now, William Devane, that would have been interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't have trusted him.
You wouldn't have trusted him.
No. He just doesn't have a trustworthy face.
Yeah, you know that's a good point. Yeah.
But I've never really seen him play that kind of role.
Right.
I've only seen him play kind of weasels.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, there's nobody on that list that makes me like wish or you know what might have been or think it could have turned out differently.
Right. And in classic early TV or this era of TV, on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Rhoda had a completely different sister played by someone else, and a brother that was named, and both of them just vanished.
The brother's name was Chuck, of course.
Yes, Chuck. That's right. They got Chuck. But Julie Kavner had auditioned for the part.
So she made an impression.
She did make an impression, I guess.
And she does make an impression.
She does, yeah. Nancy Walker and Harold Gould, I guess, had already played those parts. Mm-hmm. Now, before we get into the episode, so the opening in which Rhoda kind of explains her life. I don't know. It seems very unnecessary, but I kind of enjoy it just because of her accent. But
yeah,
she says she was born in December of 1941.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of feels responsible for World War II.
Yeah.
Okay. Later in the first season, they take Ma to the doctor. She's never been to the doctor in her life, but she's been having chest pains.
Mm.
So they go. Doctor played by Norman Fell.
Ooh.
Also, John Ritter is in the same episode. Mm. Not with Norman Fell, but he's in the same episode. So playing a different accordion player that Brenda's dating.
Wow.
Then we're going to talk about here. And she says she's 52.
Ida says she's 52.
Ida says she's 52. Yeah. And I was like, well, okay. And trying to do the math and not really doing the math. And then, you know, a few episodes later, she's having this, she's kind of like realizing she doesn't do much with her life. Mm-hmm. And she wants to go do something with her life. So she becomes a candy striper. And she explains to the girls that she never got her high school degree because she went, or diploma or whatever, because she went to work in a munitions factory because the war was raging in Europe. And she wanted to serve her country.
Okay.
Now I know we were supplying arms before we got into the war, right?
Yeah.
But this would have had to have been before the war because she didn't have a kid yet and wasn't married yet.
Right. And if she's specifically saying in Europe that that they needed,
it's still a little bit.
Yeah.
But and Rhoda is supposed to be 33, so she had her when she was like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll buy that. Yeah.
But Martin doesn't know she never graduated high school. Is he supposed to be older? I don't know. There's a lot of questions, but that, I looked up and Nancy Walker was around 52 at the time.
I don't know Martin's backstory much, but I could see
maybe
well,
he's like
the
10
timing
years older
was,
or something.
I could see being an older and yeah, it wouldn't have been that unusual for like 22 18 or 21 17 to get married or something like that.
Yeah. It just it kept it was confusing me, but and the idea Nancy Walker, God bless her.
Yeah.
God bless her tiny little. Only being 52.
It was a different time back then.
It was a different time.
People were different back then.
Uh-huh. And Valerie Harper's playing a couple years younger than her relative age.
Okay, yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's certainly credible.
Yes, yeah. Anyway, there's that.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about this episode?
Yeah, I think we should. And actually, I think this episode, we can get into some of these things. And some other things we haven't touched on, I think, will come up.
Oh.
One particular theme of the show will remind me about this. So something that Lori found a little off-putting. Huh. It comes up, I think, in this episode pretty early, if I recall correctly. Just in a casual way. But so the episode we're going to talk about is The Honeymoon, the 10th episode. So following the gigantic wedding extravaganza.
That's right.
This episode premiered November 4th, 1974. And it was preceded on CBS by the venerable show Gunsmoke, then in its 83rd season. At 9 o'clock, Maud. 9:30, Rhoda. And then at 10 o'clock, Medical Center.
What a weird night of programming.
Yeah, that's really back and forth, isn't it?
Yeah. Got kind of macho.
This is Monday night, yes.
All of those shows except for Medical Center have independent on them.
That's right. Yeah. And, Maud, B. Arthur is about as macho as they come. I mean that in a good way. Yeah. NBC had Born Free, the series, and then a movie called The Greatest Gift with Glenn Ford. Oh. I don't know what that's about, but I can just imagine, an announcer in a gentle way saying, "We now return to The Greatest Gift."
I can imagine Glenn Ford at some points. It's a gift.
Yeah.
It's the greatest gift.
Yeah.
Or maybe in a more casual Pa Kent way.
Yeah.
It's a gift, son.
Yeah, I think
it's the greatest gift.
I think he did tell Clark
that. I think he did, Glenn, yes.
Now that you mention it, I think you're on something there. ABC had The Rookies at 8. And Monday Night Football, the Rams at the Niners.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there you have it. And as we mentioned, Rhoda was on 5 seasons and about 100-some episodes. Did win a couple of Emmys, I just wanted to mention.
Yes.
Valerie Harper won one.
Valerie Harper won.
Julie Kavner, I think, won one. So, it was successful. But, it was mostly a Monday night show. And then they did move it towards the end to Sunday. And then the last season, it was on Saturday. But it was basically a Monday night show, which seems appropriate. Yeah. CBS had the Saturday comedies, but also the Monday comedies were a pretty solid thing for a while there this time.
Yes, it is The Honeymoon. And as I mentioned, it opens with Rhoda and Joe in bed sometime after they've celebrated their wedding and their wedding night. And she's watching him sleep. And he opens his eyes and says he actually wasn't asleep. And it's not a super funny scene, but it's a nice, sweet scene between them, about what their lives are going to be going forward and kind of in the afterglow of things and talking about maybe, they should do this every morning. And she points out, well, they might not be awake 4:30 every morning.
Yes.
and there's some, hey, we just had sex kind of jokes.
Yeah. Or, played sorry or for Chutes and Ladders for our 2 to 11-year-old demographic.
That's right. Yes.
We don't necessarily know for sure. I just want to point out there's other possibilities.
Yes.
But I really like this scene too. It's like, and it's one of those ones you feel maybe a little wistful knowing what happened to the characters, but just in the moment, it's like, you really believe it. Of course, they just got married and everything, but you would expect it. But it epitomizes the believability of them as a couple, I think.
Yes.
And it's something you didn't always get. Relatively quiet, like you said, not a lot of ha-ha, but just amusing. And just, it's nice sometimes to see two people in a sitcom just enjoying each other's company like that and feeling good about themselves.
Yeah, and they are really good together, good chemistry. And it's a really nice scene.
May I say, actually, because there's something that Rhoda says in this that kind of is one thing I want to bring up. Rhoda says something like I've got a stomach muscle that I let out for the first time, and and it kind of reminds me of there's a lot of jokes about weight on the show. It's really a constant theme.
Yes,
and it sort of looks it really stands out now. And, Lori found it kind of off-putting
No, I found
watching it from the beginning. But I was telling her, I was mansplaining to her, of course, which I did. But no, I was saying, well, it was not uncommon on Mary Tyler Moore for the character, and they were kind of obsessed with it. But I was also saying, for better or for worse, this was a female-dominated writing staff that was writing kind of what they knew and what they were going through and what they were experiencing and their feelings and everything. Yeah. And right from the beginning of the show, as you've known, seeing like the show from the beginning, this was like a common theme.
Yeah, and I never watching it always seemed it was off-putting to me too. I mean, partly, especially Valerie Harper, like.
Yeah. Well,
and there's something, right? Some season she lost 40 pounds.
Oh my gosh. I am glad you mentioned that because
had she gained weight?
I don't know. Not really noticeably. And a lot of times the way she dresses on the show, you wouldn't necessarily tell anyway.
Yeah.
But I think it's the 4th season, or they changed that opening sequence that you mentioned, which I think is great the 1st season. Yeah. Of course, they changed that the 2nd season, and then they changed it the 3rd season. The 4th season, they have shots of her, like they film on location stuff, and she looks noticeably, I would almost say gaunt, like I was like, whoa, it like struck me, like not necessarily in the episode itself, but in that opening. It's like, ooh, geez, something, it doesn't really look healthy.
Yeah.
And I feel bad, in her book, she talks about kind of like her relationship with weight and everything. Okay. Even though she started as a dancer, but was always kind of like worried about that or on her mind. Yeah. She had like a pretty drastic weight loss in between seasons at one point. I think. Yeah. It's something that plays differently, but I will say, not to defend the show or whatever. I mean, I think the jokes.
I think it's of the time.
Yeah, the jokes are all right, and I'm not going to. I mean, you could say, well, it was because the male patriarchy made that. I'm not going to say that.
No.
I think, like I said, I think it was the female writers being real and talking about what they were concerned about at the time.
Right. And like, there's a lot of jokes about Brenda being fat. And I'm just, by what?
Right.
Maybe by TV standards, but.
Or by 1970s
by
standards.
By 1970s standards, yeah, Twiggy standards.
Yeah, right.
She's still an attractive young woman. It's just weird.
I think one thing that it comes off as a little forced.
That joke because I didn't understand that joke.
I think it was just that she was able to let herself go.
I couldn't figure out if it was that. Well, I didn't even think of that. I was like, is it just because she can relax now, or is it like an adult joke?
I took it as a joke of like she's been holding in her stomach while she was single for like 30 years, and now she can finally.
That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. So the next scene starts with Brenda. The door buzzer wakes her up. Which Carlton, the doorman, voiced by the great L Music.
Yes.
Man, I wish I could do a Lorenzo Music
voice.
Who, folks, if you don't know, is one of the producers and writers, and, later the voice of Garfield for many years, and Venkman on the Real Ghostbusters, among other things. Very distinctive voice, of course, the laconic voice, and Carlton is a known drunk. And always, make sure to tell them it's Carlton, your doorman.
And a legendarily unseen character.
Right. Yeah, at the end of this season, you see his hand.
Yeah, I watched an episode where you sort of see his back, like in a taxi cab, which is kind of jarring. Yeah. Just to see him from behind and kind of his head. But probably maybe one of the great unseen characters of TV history.
I think so. Can you count Vera on Cheers as a character?
I do. I would.
Okay. Yes. So he's telling her that your sister who didn't come home last night is coming up, and Brenda explains that she just got married, and then she shows up, and they're excited, and they talk about things like what happened after Joe and Rhoda left at the wedding, which the wedding was supposed to be small, and it ended up being at the parents' house, and the entire cast of Mary Tyler Moore show came.
That's right.
Almost the entire Ted didn't come.
Yeah.
I can't imagine Rhoda would want Ted to come.
Yeah, Phyllis was pushing it as it was.
Yes. And it turned into a kind of big to-do, and, Brenda's like, Pop had a few drinks and asked people to guess how much the wedding cost, and Ma had a few drinks and told them how much it cost.
Right.
And she remembered all the ants walking down the street into the sunrise with carrying table settings or centerpieces. And she kind of hooked up with Nick Lobo, the accordion player, who I don't think was played by the actor who ends up playing.
No, in that episode he was not.
And also that Ma's been trying to reach Rhoda here because she didn't want to call it home, interrupt. So then she calls, and Rhoda has a one-way conversation with her where Ida says they have a wedding gift, and Rhoda's like, okay, well, you can come over after dinner. And then what is she?
She says, well,
yeah, I guess you won't know what time we're going to finish, so yeah, you can come over for it.
Might as well, yeah. It's like, oh, she's the master.
Yeah, she's...
Is it just me, or now that I hadn't thought about this before, but they use the phone a lot as a device in this show. There's a lot of like one-sided phone conversations.
Yeah.
It's like second only to the Bob Newhart show, maybe in the 70s. But I hadn't really put that together, but I think they do, yeah.
And I want to stop and say, since you said you were not as big a Brenda fan, at least as a leading character, let's say, probably my favorite thing is the two of them together. It's the way it's written, but their chemistry, and it's their acting style too. Like, I mean, there's the whole show, them and David Groh, at least, they like laugh at things people are saying. It just seems very natural, and I believe them as sisters.
Yeah, there's a great chemistry there, no doubt. One other thing that hurts Brenda in my mind is some of the people the company she keeps. There's Nick Lobo, and then she dates like Benny?
Cousin Lenny?
No. Well, there's the
cousin, third cousin Lenny has a foot fetish. Yeah.
Later in the run, there's Benny, who's played by Ray. I can't remember his last name.
Oh,
The one who was married to Joyce DeWitt for a while. That's a horribly reductive way to...
That Ray.
And she's got a roommate played by Melanie Mayron, who's annoying too. A very young Melanie Mayron. So to me, like, I'm associating like Brenda-centered scenes with some of these people that I'm not real crazy about.
Yeah, okay.
Like in her orbit. So but I will not argue with you at all that Rhoda and Brenda together are a very good, effective combination. That I will not dispute. Very well said, and I'm glad you mentioned that.
And in the episodes where Mary Tyler Moore shows up, she gets along well with her too.
Yeah.
So then later we're back at currently Joe's apartment. In a few episodes, they're going to move to an apartment in the same building as Brenda, so that Carlton can be their doorman. That's the main reason for them moving, right?
Yeah.
We just don't have we don't like our doorman here.
Yeah. Back in the day, before real estate got so ridiculous in New York City, most people made their decisions, where to live based on a dorm.
I think it's from what I hear, it's an important thing.
It sure is, yes.
And they're looking through all their wedding gifts for the wine glasses, but Joe finds a fondue pot and asks who got it for them, and Rhoda's like, who didn't?
Yeah.
And then Ma and Pa, Ida and Martin, show up, and she's immediately being passive aggressive,
yeah,
or just aggressive.
Yeah, maybe.
It's not much passive. She like looks down at Rhoda's stomach and, any news from the stork yet? Tells Joe he needs to change the name on his name card on the mailbox and the buzzer or whatever.
Yeah, I like that. Starting right in with
yeah.
And she likes Joe, but it's just like, this is just her way of like what's important to her.
Yeah.
Is this, cementing a necessary step she thinks he needs to do to cement this marriage.
She's been desperate for this marriage to happen.
That's right.
And I guess, if she was getting married at 18 or 19, her idea is 33 is, still back then that would have been seemed old by some social standards.
Right.
And Rhoda, she didn't have time to make anything because of work and stuff, and so she just got some fried chicken. 2 pieces of everything, so Martin suggests they get some toothpicks and make a whole chicken.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, which is and she laughs at that, again, as somebody telling a joke.
Yeah.
It's meant to be the character telling a joke, not making a wisecrack for our sakes.
That's a good point. Yeah, the characters react organically to each other saying funny things in the series. And that's a good point.
Like Ida is the kind of character says funny things that she doesn't know are fun.
Yeah,
it's coming. It's that dramatic irony kind of thing. Where we know she's saying something ridiculous. But a lot of the characters just have a good sense of humor. Anyway, it turns out they've been saving up money since Rhoda was little for a wedding gift, and of course it took her so long that they have a lot of money saved up, and they give her this gift and this little toy like bath boat, and they say open it up, and it's 2 tickets for a 10-day cruise to the Caribbean. And Rhoda and Joe are kind of like, we just wanted to do something quiet, and they insist, and they don't really put up too much of a fight this time.
Yeah, and and Joe's being a good sport here. He's remarkably patient dealing with his in-laws, I think.
Yes.
I'm kind of impressed with him, really.
I mean, at least in the first season, we only see his parents a couple times. They're divorced. And Robert Alda plays his dad.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I don't know. They don't seem like Joe's parents.
No. Yeah, you're right. It didn't seem
They seem very
natural.
Kind of like almost upper crusty or something.
Yeah. Unless Joe was going the other way, like...
I'm going to be tough.
Deliberately putting on a front,
Yeah.
Going to be working class. But one thing, too, that reminds me before we leave this scene is there's a nice intimacy about the 4 of them just sitting at the table, like Joe sitting on the floor you know, around like a small coffee table, eating fried chicken, you know, and it's just like, okay, this seems like realistic. Like, oh, she just got fried chicken, but they're just eating, you know, and like talking about this together. And I really liked it. I mean, this scene, despite some of the, like the cartoonish aspects of Ida, like you mentioned, these feel like real people, you know, that know each other, and it just adds like a nice realism and again, a nice intimacy to the episode.
Right. Now, I just thought of this, but they mentioned that they went on a cruise on their first anniversary.
Yeah.
Would people have been going on cruises during World War II?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Maybe they were just like, you know, went on the Long Island Ferry or something. Or Staten Island Ferry.
That's a good point. I don't think the industry was doing real well back then.
No. And then they went on one again last year to relive it, and they loved it. And they said, you know, the food's great. The things people always say about cruises. Ida says, real hip people like us. And then we go on board the boat, and with some shots, kind of love boaty shots of the dock and the confetti and all that.
Yeah, did you recognize any celebrities in that shot?
I did not.
No, neither did I, unfortunately.
But it starts in the cabin, and of course this thing of people going on board to say goodbye to people on cruises. Does this really happen? I don't know. Like, I've never been on a cruise.
Yeah, why do you need to do that?
Yeah.
You can't just like say goodbye from the
right.
dock.
Yeah. You wouldn't get on the airplane with it.
That's right. No.
I mean, you can't do it at all, go to the gate even anymore, but you know.
You don't do it on a train or a bus?
No, not usually. Yeah. You can't get past, again, you can't get past the... But it makes for a good scene.
Yeah, you're right. This is on TV at least. Yeah, people always do this on boats, don't they?
And so it starts with Ida and Martin come in, and it's a tiny room with bunk beds, and so and they're disappointed. They're not really trying to make the best of it. And then Brenda arrives with Nick Lobo, played by the great Richard Masur. Because I should take a moment, and we'll put a picture of this up. Last year, you were kind enough for my birthday to give me Hasbro has this thing where you can take an app that takes photographs of your face, and then you choose some hair and facial hair, and then puts it on top of a figure from one of their franchises. So I chose The Mandalorian. I did this, and I got it a couple months later, and it did not look like me. It looked like Richard Masur. It's a very specific way to get it wrong.
You know, many people would be flattered by that, or just be thrilled at that. But you know, I can see why it wasn't quite what you know. Yeah,
it wasn't quite what I expected.
It was representation of you as much.
But
as,
I think it's cool. I mean, I don't know anybody else has a Richard Masur figure.
I don't either.
Maybe I can, you know, get some like a more appropriate body for him at some point. You know, like one of these Marvel figures that's just a guy in a suit or something.
Yes, well.
But anyway, he's there, and he doesn't have a lot of lines, but I thought he was very funny. Nick is not a bright man.
I think he was as great as the actor is. I think he was greater on One Day at a Time. I preferred him on that.
Yeah.
And again, like I just recently saw another episode with him. I think a little of him goes a long way. In this scene, he's very funny, and his interactions with Ida are great. But
he played Nick Lobo on the other episode?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
The character returns, yes.
Okay.
He's like a recurring character, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
And as late as, like, the first episode with, like, Johnny Venture has him. He's the one that introduces Rhoda to Johnny Venture.
Okay. Yeah, he and Ida don't see eye to eye, exactly. Like
Literally, they don't.
Yes. She's like, a musician? What do you do for a living?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Brenda explains that when Rhoda is uncomfortable or trying to hide something, she covers her mouth. She says, everybody I can't, has a nervous gesture, but then she doesn't. I thought that was going to lead to us finding out the rest, but it didn't.
I don't know if Brenda should have really said that.
No.
It's kind of like betraying her sister a little bit.
It is,
in this case.
I like the idea that she's keeping track of all this.
Yeah.
That seems like a little sister thing to do.
Yeah.
Observing what's going on. You know, and she's like 10 years younger than Rhoda, so she's a very little sister. But Nick calls Ida Mama.
I just thought of this. The comic strip Mama by Mel Lazarus. Nancy Walker would have made a great Mama. If they ever did a live action version of that. I think she could have pulled it off.
Okay.
You know, she's dominating, she's short.
Yep.
All right, sorry, I had to get that in there. It's a brilliant idea.
Oh, mamas or something. Did I give birth to you? No. And he leans down to talk to her because she's very short. He's fairly tall, and she's like, "Don't lean down to talk to me." And he keeps putting his arm around Brenda and just keeps making comments about that. Yeah. And then Rhoda and Joe arrive and, are looking around this room. And so we're kind of getting the a stateroom scene again. It doesn't quite go to the lengths of the Marx Brothers or Donnie and Marie, but it's pretty crowded in there. Yeah. And Rhoda's like, oh, it's, it's something. It's wonderful. And covers her mouth. And then she and Joe go into the other room to discuss things. It's like a combination bathroom, closet, and wet bar. Yeah. What?
I wonder if maybe this is just a poor use of space, like poor design here. It seems like they could have sacrificed some of this space and made the main room a little bit bigger, right? Oh. Yeah. Like if you add the two spaces together, it's probably not that bad.
Oh, right, yeah. I question putting a closet in the same room as a shower.
That's a little weird, yes.
Yeah.
I was happy to see a toilet on screen.
I was happy to see a toilet.
In 1974, that's revolutionary.
Again, that's where, the strides TV was taking at the time. Yeah. A few years earlier, Archie was flushing his toilet for the first time on TV. And now we're seeing a toilet.
Yes. Ah, boy.
If only Pat, Parents Against Toilets, hadn't had their way, and who knows what we would have seen.
Yeah, it set us back for years.
Yeah, but Rhoda's already ready to jump ship, and but they kind of calm down and figure, well, we'll go. I don't know. We don't have to spend all the time in the room, although it's their honeymoon. But so they go out and they all have some champagne. Part of the reason they left was so they didn't get hit by the cork. Yeah. And they're toasting, and there's the thing of having to reach up to toast everyone.
That was well done.
Yes, and refusing to toast. Yeah, Nick.
That was very well shot and well staged.
Yes, and all the supporting characters. That's it for this episode. Obviously, they're not staying on the boat. So Rhoda and Joe arrive for dinner. Bese Mucho is playing. The band is playing that, and it's all old people dancing. Now, see, this is partly why the 52 confused me. Because in this, Rhoda's like, there's not anybody under 70 here.
Oh, right.
And, Ida and Martin had been on this cruise the year before.
Right. So the idea is that they're contemporaries of...
Yes, I thought they were under 70s.
Yeah, you know what? That makes sense now that you mention it.
And they start dancing, and then they're told to change partners, and Rhoda gets to dance with Mr. Fosner, played by Charles Lane.
Yeah, making his return to the podcast.
Not grumpy this time.
No, a rare non-grumpy appearance by Charles Lane.
Yes. And he's asked her if she knows how to play shuffleboard. She doesn't, and she's like, well, I'll teach you tomorrow right after your nap.
Yeah. This is the part of the cruise that would annoy me. I could live with the small stateroom, and everything else. I could live with being the youngest people. Hey, I'd probably enjoy being on a cruise with a bunch of older people. But right off the bat, the thing about changing partners, I don't want to be forced to interact with people.
No, I
don't. This is the kind of thing where, this is happening already. I would be upset at this point.
Yeah, and then they switch back, and Joe and Rhoda sit down at their table. Of course, you're assigned a table. I also don't like that. You're forced to sit with people you don't know.
Exactly.
And there's a really old guy played by Burt Muster.
Yeah, Burt Mustin, yes.
Mustin, yes.
The great, yes, who was playing old characters 20 years earlier.
And he's asleep.
Yeah.
Or they hope he's asleep. There are a lot of jokes at the expense of his, whether he's not. But he briefly wakes up and asks if they're in Puerto Rico yet. And they're like, no. And he goes back to sleep.
Yeah.
And then another guy, and somewhat older gentleman, sits down, and he's out of breath, and he's played by Arthur Space. Is that his name? Anyway, he turns out he's the ship's doctor, and he's being run ragged here.
Yeah. It's not a vacation for him.
No. And he checks. He's like, anybody who looks asleep here, I gotta check.
Yeah.
So he checks the guy's pulse, and then he gets called away to 2 different decks.
Yeah, that was funny. I like that whole bit. I don't know how many episodes of television had Burt Mustin and Charles Lane in them, but I think it's special when they are. I mean, between the two of them, they must have been in like hundreds of episodes. So this is a special moment.
Yeah.
And Burt Mustin was like playing 104 from the beginning, and Charles Lane lived to be like 104. So, you got just classic. I love the fact that they wanted to represent old people, and they picked these two. Well done, Rhoda. I really enjoyed both of them in this. Charles Lane didn't have a whole lot to do. No. Burt Mustin just sitting there sleeping made me laugh, though.
And the Fosners join them, and then the ship comedian, played by Danny Wells.
Hey, yeah, he's very...
And I confused him with real comedian, whose name I'm forgetting.
I remember Danny
Wells. The guy
who
played Sinestro on...
Oh, Charlie Callis. Oh,
yes.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that. See, I remembered him as like the guy from the Jeffersons.
Oh, yeah.
The guy that the bartender or whatever on the...
That's right.
But yeah, I could see Charlie Callis too. That's funny.
But he's very old school comedian.
For sure.
Making a lot of old people jokes, of course. And then he has a note that there's honeymooners there and put a spotlight on Rhoda and Joe and says, you got to have your first dance alone here. And Rhoda's like, no, we won't. But then they get up and they do, but then he's like standing right behind them singing some song about why did I get married, basically.
Yeah.
And Rhoda has Joe waltz them out of the room.
Yeah.
And they get to the door. He's like, any last word? Says, I pray to God your microphone cord doesn't reach to our cat.
I got to admit, I was kind of laughing at his patter.
Yeah.
Like he asks Joe like how long he's been married. He says, and then he asks her how long she's been married.
Yeah.
And she says the same, and he does this like exaggerated look in his face, like she's playing along, she's feisty or whatever like that, because the way she says it,
And what is Joe? Does he hesitate or he said about a week or something?
Yeah, he says good memory.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that the show could have done. I mean, you put these two people, normal people, into situations with like kind of these wackier characters,
and they can commiserate.
And the characters don't need to come back. They make an impression. You got an excellent supporting cast in this episode, and with good results, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And then the last scene, they're in a bar, and it turns out it's in Baltimore, just first stop, and they're both. Joe's never been so glad to see Baltimore in my life.
You and I have spent some time in Baltimore, as its charms,
as they say,
yes.
And exactly. Other things. I have some kind of advertising campaign going on right now.
Oh yeah,
it's like the most unique city in America, or something like that.
That's an interesting thing. They could have had. Should they have had like Richard Belzer show up at the this bar?
Only if they had, only if they had known he could have played the ship comedian.
Yeah, that's right. Would have given a different energy to that scene.
Yeah.
But no less effective, in my opinion.
No.
Is Rhoda already tied in? Probably is with the Fontana-verse.
Yeah, I think so.
It's got to be.
I think.
Since just somebody from one of those shows must
have. Yeah, because,
although the episode we talked about on St. Elsewhere, they were watching Mary Tyler Moore.
So it at least exists that way. But then I don't know if any of those shows ever crossed over with Bob Newhart's show. Because that one character was on.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Oh.
So, the ship horn blows and all the old people leave and they kind of sit there, and the bartender asks them if they want a drink, and Joe orders 2 screwdrivers with fresh orange juice, and the bartender's like, well, oranges are out of season. And Rhoda's like, yeah, we'll wait.
Yeah.
That's the end. And I guess, they probably celebrated in Baltimore instead. It'd be okay. I don't know what it was like in 1974, but
yeah, the Inner Harbor probably was a little different then.
Yeah, I don't think that was a thing then. Or then maybe they were building it then.
I'm sure there's plenty to do.
Yeah, or they just caught a train home.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm curious about the luggage.
Right.
Well, curious if anyone on board was, those young people go. Maybe they just saw, they're having their honeymoon.
Yeah,
they just showed up and picked up their luggage.
That's quite possible. They certainly would have stood out on that cruise.
Yeah. Mr. Fosner was like, she didn't come for the shuffleboard.
Yeah, he was crushed.
Yeah.
Hopefully his feelings weren't hurt, yeah. But he seemed to be having a good time regardless.
Sure.
So hopefully he enjoyed the rest of his cruise.
Yeah. So I think it's a strong episode. Partly we chose it, right, because it had a whole ensemble in it.
Mm-hmm. And then some, yeah.
Yeah.
They're putting the Nick Lobo in, and then I agree. I think it's a good episode, and I think it's interesting the way they structured it. Mm-hmm. So they show you some of like the aftermath of the wedding, and they touch on that. They have a scene with the parents, and then they do the cruise. Instead of doing a whole episode on that cruise, it probably worked out pretty well. If they got in and out, like, and did 10 minutes on the ship or whatever, and got that, and didn't like belabor it. And overall, it seems like a pretty tight, despite like some quieter scenes like we mentioned, where there's not a whole ton going on. It seems like a very fulfilling, 25-minute episode. Yeah.
So mixed feelings about the series overall. But like I said, I mean, the first season I kind of loved, and we'll probably check out the second season at some point.
I think you should see some of the second season and see, okay, they're a married couple, and if the show's still working,
right?
And then you can judge for yourself if they needed to break up the characters.
Yeah, I don't really want to see them get divorced.
Yeah, it is really a bummer when they start, when things go south. But it's also kind of weird because it's not like they drag it on, but there's episodes without him before they get divorced, and it's kind of like essentially they go almost right to divorce and not really the separation. But they do have that dynamic, like I talked about, where she's trying to get him back, like in the episodes where he is there. But yeah, they made a decision and they got to live with it.
Yeah.
Maybe sometime we can retroactively tell MTM Enterprises how to fix Phyllis. But Yeah, I agree with you that what I've seen, like the first episode, I think the show was working, and to me, it's kind of like maybe like a B-level sitcom. It's pleasant. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, but I think it's working for what it is. I think the lead characters are appealing. A good mix from the supporting cast. So to me, I don't understand why they had to change things. Right. So it wasn't one of my favorite shows, but I think it was working very well. And the first season, I think I'd recommend any of that.
Yeah, for sure. See, Phyllis, I just can't even imagine.
Like a show built around that character?
It's nothing against Cloris Leachman, but she's just so unpleasant.
Yeah.
I mean, she almost ruins Rhoda's wedding.
Right.
Like she's not a center character.
Yeah, what's the more audacious move? Is trying to spin off Phyllis or taking the Lou Grant character and giving him a drama?
I think she's trying to spin off Phyllis.
Yeah.
Were people dying for that, or is it just, Cloris Leachman she's an Oscar winner.
It was, money, and like, hey, Fred Silverman wants spin-offs, I guess.
They're like, okay, we have a certain number of sitcom slots. We're going to fill this many with Norman Lear show.
Yeah.
With All in the Family spin-offs, this many with Mary Tyler Moore spin-offs, and then MASH.
Yeah.
And Bob Newhart.
But, this wasn't, like now NBC does that with like the Dick Wolf shows, right?
Yeah, right.
This wasn't quite the same. You couldn't quite do it like that back then, I guess.
No. Anyway, I think that's about all I have.
Yeah, I think I've said all I've got to say about Rhoda, and much of it I think fairly positive. Some drawbacks, but yeah, funny show, and I think Valerie Harper is great and very likable actress, and did a great job on the series. This episode brought to you by Windows by Rhoda. This episode also brought to you by New York. This is your last chance. This episode also brought to you by Carl, your doorman. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.